As we look to build out this economy, it's my pleasure on behalf of the Cabinet to sign this order to deliver that tax cut.
Prime Minister Mark Kernney says his government's first order of business is to make good on an expensive election promise. Now, that paper he just signed does not have the power to put a tax cut into force, but it does call for a 1 percentage point reduction to the lowest tax bracket starting on July 1st. Today, Kernney's finance minister expanded on that agenda, saying an economic statement is coming in the fall, but there's no budget planned for before that. Joining me now is Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne. Minister, it's good to see you, and congratulations on your reappointment,
Thank you very much, sir.
I want to start. It's been 394 days since the last federal budget. I think a lot of us had an expectation you would deliver a budget throughout the summer. We're not getting one. Why not?
Well, we're going to do things in the right order and the logical order. Like I said, first of all, today is a big day, you know, for Canadians. Middle class tax cut. You know, we listen to Canadians. We're delivering for Canadians. The first order of business is this tax cut for the middle class. 22 million Canadians will benefit from that. You're talking to up to $840 for a two-income family. So that's very significant. And I think it really shows a lot that we're going to have your back. I mean, there's a key message by the Prime Minister in that. The second thing we're going to have is a throne speech. You remember we said you need to have a throne speech to lay out the priorities of the government. And then we're going to have a fall economic statement, substantive one, at the beginning of fall, to really take into account what has happened, the volatility you see also in the market. Because what I've said to the civil service, we're going to provide, this is an era of, I'm always going to be very straight with Canadians to provide stability, predictability, transparency, and tell it as it is. There's a lot of uncertainty in the market.
Sure.
There's a lot of things happening. Next week, just to give you an example, we're hosting the G7 finance ministers. With the central bank governors. We'll be discussing about the macro aspect that could impact the Canadian economy as well. So that's why I say it's very logical. You start with what matters to Canadians, which is the tax cut. You have a throne speech, then you have a fall economic statement. We're going to be transparent, and the priorities that have been outlined by the Prime Minister will be there.
Right, but the last time we've had an update of the public books was December 16th, and with the fall economic statement, and that got very much overshadowed by the events of that day when Chrystia Freeland resigned from Cabinet, and then the budget was April 16th. So here we are, the tax cut, and while I appreciate it was the first promise I think you made in the election campaign, and you want to really help middle-class Canadians, that's going to cost about $5-6 billion, you know? We have no way to place that into the financial framework of the country right now, right? Because you haven't updated the numbers, right?
No, but we've been very transparent in the platform. I mean, the priorities that have been outlined by the Prime Minister, building one economy, and making sure we favor Canadian companies in public procurement.
No, the promises I get, but we don't know what the deficit is. We don't know what the growth projections are. None of those things, right? And
that's why we're going to provide that update to Canadian, a substantive update when we're coming back, which will take into account what we have seen in the market. Hopefully by then there'll be less uncertainty that we need to factor into. So for me, it's about transparency with Canadians. I want to be straight with Canadians and give them the best possible picture that I can. And that's why I say Canadians understand there's kind of a logical order. You provide the tax cut, you have the throne speech, you have a fall economic update, which is going to be substantive.
So why
that in the past.
Why is the logical order to reduce government revenues by cutting the taxes before you update the country on the state of the government?
Well, because
finances?
That's the flagship promise that the Prime Minister has made, and we have delivered on it. Today, he's been instructing us. You've seen him sign the order, and then we're going to have a Ways and Means motion as soon as we get back in Parliament. We're going to table legislation. And that matters to Canadians because you're talking about 22 million people who are going to benefit from that. This is starting July 1st. So for me to say, first thing first, let's help folks. Right. Folks are saying there's a lot of things, help me. We need to have a bit more in our pocket. So this is helping them. And then you say, and that's why it's special this time, because you need to have a throne speech. We just started the legislature, so we need to have that. And then logically after that, you have an update fiscally, whether you talk a budget or fiscal update. But what I'm saying is that when we're going to come back, we're going to present an update to Canadians. No, but it will be no surprise because the priority, investing in our military, investing in housing, investing in infrastructure, making sure we have the strongest economy of the G7. My point is that we're just coming out of a long discussion with Canadians for weeks and months. So there's been no surprise about what's going to be the priority
No, look,
how we're going to find
and I'm not
out.
asking this because of surprises, but essentially the government is operating right now in special warrants because Parliament has been dissolved, and that's the way money gets spent to keep the lights on in the various entities that rely on public funding. And to deliver on so obviously you'll have to pass some sort of supply bill while Parliament opens, but to start delivering on the promises, does it mean one piece of legislation for each promise? Because normally you bundle them in a budget, which lays it out and gives you the spending authority. And if we're not going to, it sounds like we're not going to have a budget in 2025 at all. Does this mean we wait until the spring of 2026 to get
like I
a
said,
full budget?
We'll have a very substantive update coming the fall, and that's going to be giving a picture to Canadians, because we'll have less uncertainty. I would think by then. I mean, we're seeing that in markets, less volatility, a bit more certainty about U.S. tariffs and how things are evolving. And I think, what I want to be is prudent. That's the word that I want to use, and you'll probably have me on your show again over the next few years.
I would hope, yes.
But I would say, I want to be prudent. I want to present something to Canadians that they can trust, that they know has been reasoned, that takes into account the promise that have been made by the Prime Minister and the government. So in a sense, it is very step-by-step, very logical, very thoughtful as well, because you don't want to provide something that would be affected by markets or volatility very quickly.
Right.
You want to take that into account.
But the last time we had this kind of delay was COVID, right? And we're essentially, and you could understand with the world economy going into a medically induced coma in dramatic ways and, the rapid response of the big spending support programs, a budget wouldn't last the day, right? In terms of its projections. There are discussions with the Trump administration. I mean, presumably there should be a deal by the fall. I mean, why not take the step to at least update the financial projections and the economic projections in the legislature this summer? Because it has been
quite a time. There's a timing issue in the sense that first you need to Parliament is going to come back. We're going to table legislation to enable the tax cut, which is really what Canadians. I would say that's the first order of priority. It's about affordability. That's what they told us. Then you need to have a throne speech, because that's the thing that you need to put in the sequence, is that when you open Parliament, for folks watching at home...
I know, but that's one day. That's the 27th of May,
I know,
right?
But, if you look at the time of the House, there's not much time in order to do all that. So then you say, okay, we need to do things in the proper order. And when we're back, we're going to provide, like I said, a full substantive update to Canadians about where we stand in our fiscal situation. And hopefully by then, some of the uncertainties will have subdued. Right. And I think, for me, you will always see someone who wants to be prudent. When you talk about the fiscal situation of the country, you want to provide as clear a picture as you can to Canadians. But like I said, the framework has been set already, David. We said we're going to spend less so we can invest more. We said to Canadians where we're going to invest. We said that we need to bring the operational spending increase from 9% to 2%. So a lot of that is out there, and the platform has just been discussed with Canadians in the last few weeks. So my point is that the priorities will remain. We will have more certainty. It's going to be more prudent. And we will gladly present that to Canadians.
The Conservatives have criticized this, saying Canadians were told that Mark Kernney, the supposed serious economist, and these are Pierre Poilievre's words, not mine, would bring competence and clarity. Instead, we're getting delays and dysfunction. What's your response to the Conservative?
Well, competence and clarity is that you have to do things logically, step by step, and provide that with prudence. I would think that's what Canadians expect now. In an uncertain world, like I said, there'll be turbulence in the short term. But what they want to see is people at the helm which are very prudent at how they handle that. And I think prudence for me is to provide as much certainty as we can to Canadians, taking into account a number of factors. I mean, one thing I would respond to Pierre Poilievre, you may not have seen, but the world has changed in 6 weeks. And these changes are not just affecting Canada. Just to give you an example, next week, the agenda, I wish you would be with me at the G7, but you would see the agenda of the G7 finance minister. There's a lot of macroeconomic risks that we need to take into account as a global economy, which will have obviously an impact as well on the Canadian economy. And the Prime Minister has set the priority to build the Canadian economy. So we're saying, we're not going to wait for that. We're going to build our economy. We're going to invest here. We're going to build homes. We're going to provide the tax cut. And for me, it was, the flagship promise he made was to have the back of Canadians, and we deliver as the first thing. I think for me it's telling about where this government is going. And you should not confuse being responsible and prudent with slogans that we have heard before. This is about prudence and transparency to Canadians.
Okay, I know I've got to let you go, but I want to squeeze in a couple of quick questions on what's happening with the electric vehicle sector in Canada. You saw the announcement from Honda that it's delaying its build-out, it's restructuring where it makes the CRV to more favor the United States, so it says it will keep its workforce and production levels in Canada consistent. But this is a delay in the electric vehicle side. You were a big part of deals with Stellantis, Northvolt, Volkswagen. We've seen sales and demand just plummet in that sector. Are you convinced right now, are you confident right now that the EV battery deals you signed as industry minister will see the light of day, that those will continue despite what's happening here?
I'd say our North Star is still towards electrification. I spoke to the folks of Honda in Japan. What you're seeing, and David, I know that it may sound as a surprise, but when you shift technology after 100 years that you've been doing the same thing, it's pretty normal where you have like a shift sometime in terms of technology. We need to make the batteries cheaper so the cars could be cheaper, the EV. Yep. You've seen a different take up by consumers. Consumer demand is not perhaps what the manufacturer were expecting at the time. And therefore, you see some kind of delay in terms of adoption. But, this is not abnormal. I just want to remind you, when Tesla started, they took 17 years before they were profitable. When Henry Ford launched Model T, you have these normal shifts. The thing that I'm happy, though, is that we were very prudent with Canadian taxpayers' money. Because remember,
no, it's all back-ended. The subsidies are back-ended.
What we offered is production credit. So in a sense, the vast majority of what we provide in terms of support, or we promise in terms of support, is if and when they would be in production, which assume that they have the construction risk.
But how confident are you they will get
risk.
To production at this point? Because Donald Trump is trying to take all of this industry and he's trying to take the existing auto sector.
Don't take it from me. Take it from the CEOs of these companies. I had discussions with many of the leadership of these companies. They still see the North Star as electrification in North America. There's different markets.
But in Canada?
Well, I think they see the fundamentals. And you know why? It's because of our workers. You have to go back to fundamentals. The best performing plants of these companies are in Canada. And we offer the best workers, proximity to critical minerals. And we offer also a very long and established manufacturing base. So these things are not going away. There's no doubt that the tariffs that have been imposed by President Trump on Canada are not helpful. Right. But I remain confident in the long term because what I see now is shift in technology, shift in consumer demand. But like you've heard from them, they're still going on with these projects. They will reschedule them to face the reality of demand. But they're saying to us, at least, that they will continue with these investments because they see that as the future of electrification.
So delayed but not dead.
That's what I hear from them. And I'm happy also that we were very prudent in how we structure these investments so that we would, we have the upside, but we don't have really the downside in terms of the investments we were to make. And we're going to keep fighting. That's why I'm saying you go back to my earlier point, why you should have an update in the fall. There's a lot of these things. No, but you just mentioned one. There's a lot of these things that happen which are, we need to take into account. If you want to be credible, if you want to be, talking to Canadians about their finances, it has to be very serious and it has to be transparent and it has to be prudent. That's what I'm providing to Canadians.
Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne, thank you for your time today, sir. Appreciate it.
Real pleasure.
Okay, so what can Canadians expect in the absence of a new federal budget? Kevin Page is the president of the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy at the University of Ottawa, and he is, of course, a former parliamentary budget officer. Kevin Page, good to see you. Thanks for being here today, sir.
Good to be with you.
What happens in the absence of a budget? I know one isn't strictly necessary, but when you got a lot of big promises you want to deliver on, it feels like that's the way to do it. What happens now?
Well, the question is it sustainable to start implementing measures, asking Parliament to vote on new appropriations or to change the Tax Act, without some update on the fiscal position of the government, knowing that the party platform that the Liberals produced was based on a set of assumptions that would no longer hold, that the economy is much weaker now, the deficit will be much higher.
It seems like that is what François-Philippe Champagne is saying, though, right? That there is so much uncertainty because of the trade disruption and where it's potentially going as they navigate the post-Trump world, that the projections are too fluid to put out there right now? The last time we saw something like that was COVID, but this is not a pandemic. It's just the president. What do you make of that argument?
Yeah, I don't think it's a strong argument. I understand the argument more in terms of compressed timelines, as the finance minister said, speech from the throne. And they're going to need spending authorities to get them through the summer. So just the timelines, effectively, we're talking about a month. But I think the reason you have a fiscal plan is to deal with the uncertainty. I think Canadians, they've been told that they're in a crisis. We've seen labor market numbers show that the unemployment rate is almost cresting 7% now. We've lost 80,000 jobs in the last few months. The growth numbers, I think people are expecting that maybe we'll even be in a recession as early as the second quarter. So I think it's not sustainable for the finance minister not to put out some sort of economic and fiscal document, even if it's just the outlook, and which would include the fiscal position of the government as Parliament makes these changes to the Tax Act.
Yeah, a minority of Parliament is going to have to vote on an election promise of a middle-class tax cut that's $5 or $6 billion without knowing how that affects the absolute bottom line. You can see how it affects mine and your bottom line because, you can adjust that on your tax revenue. But for the macro picture for the government itself, that's a difficult thing for a Parliament to do, is it not?
Yeah, I don't think they should be put in that position. I think, I can make a couple points. One is that I think there's been, over the past couple of governments, both the Liberal government and the Conservative government, we've gotten sort of sloppy with respect to the financial cycle. So we've been tabling budgets late. We've been not giving Parliament the planning pictures. You noted in your interview, we didn't get a planning picture during COVID. Yes, it's difficult, but I still, Canadians want to know what should they expect, as a result of this uncertainty. We're getting information. We're getting information from private sector forecasts. There's a new outlook from Oxford Economics basically suggesting a recession starting later this year. About half the growth that was in the platform assumptions. We'll get an update from the Bank of Canada in July when they release their monetary policy report with the next interest rate adjustment. So we're going to get that information, but why shouldn't we get this information from the government who's actually making changes to the balance sheet?
So if you listen to what the Prime Minister said about they were going to move with an urgency and a determination, and move quickly on things, just not when it comes to a budget or an economic update, I guess, but how does that tangibly affect the operations and preparations inside government departments, right? Because if you're getting ready, and he's got this distinction he's going to draw between operating versus capital and how they present the fiscal plan, how does this affect how fast and how effectively the bureaucracy can move on implementing the agenda of this re-elected government?
I think certainly the bureaucracy, while the election, the campaign was running, they were preparing transition briefing books. They were looking at the Liberal platform, the Conservative platform, trying to figure out, is this majority, is this minority government? So they're preparing, they've probably done a lot of work, in terms of what this might look like in terms of a budget. But, still to put together budget documents, to do the coordination between a new prime minister, a finance minister, with cabinet, with line departments, they don't have the time between now and say the end of June. But having said that, David, I would say we're gonna need a budget in the early fall, not an economic statement. It'll be a full-fledged budget. If you go back to the platform, the Liberal platform, they had almost 100 initiatives that were impacting 2025-26. There were $35 billion worth of new measures. And a lot of that was capitals, and there was also a lot of operating type of expenditures. They have to have a budget in order to implement that, with ways and means motions, with supplementary estimates.
Right, because right now they're sort of operating on special warrants because Parliament was dissolved. So and people see these numbers from the special warrants and they get posted on social media and think it's brand new money. It's just the continuation of status quo spending being done so the lights stay on and you get your EI benefits and CPP and whatever, these sorts of things. But that's not a way to implement an agenda, right, Kevin Page? And they'll pass a supply bill in Parliament which moves you off special warrants and allows things to continue as they normally did, but now with parliamentary authority instead of the Governor General doing it. But if you're going to increase the wages for the armed forces, if you're going to invest more in housing and create these things, that requires a lot of legislation. So what does this do to the pace at which the government would want to implement its mandate? If there's no budget in 2025, does that mean the aggressive implementation of what they do has to wait until 2026? How does it work?
Yeah. Yeah, we'd effectively be kicking the can down the road to 26, 27 then, which is not going to happen. I'm pretty sure we will. I do believe that we will get some version of an economic and fiscal outlook from the finance minister, even though he's not prepared to say that he's going to deliver one. Perhaps he delivers ones outside of Parliament. And again, I think we get something like a full-scale budget probably in October. And as you know, just this new government and the public service needs a little bit of time to prepare. But you're right, you can't make those substantive changes. You can't create new funds, for infrastructure or substantially increase wages for veterans, for our military people. You can't implement what they've said they were going to implement without a budget, and we're going to need that, and the clock is ticking.
So in terms of the overall financial health of the country, I wonder, bond rating agencies and debt buyers, there's a lot of debt to be rolled over and renewed right now. And there has been some warnings from groups like Fitch that, the fiscal situation, because of the large debt taken on during COVID, and now everyone kind of promising big spending and tax cuts, there's some downside risks there in terms of the overall health, especially exacerbated by the trade and the economic uncertainty. If you don't do a budget, how does that affect the way the big institutional rating agencies and bond buyers look at Canada? I mean, is there risk there in any way?
Yeah, there's risk. There's without that type of transparency, there'll be less confidence from bond buyers. I still think, Canada overall, the way we're positioned now, still relatively modest deficit relative to the U.S., relative to our the other OECD countries. I don't think that there's overall risk with respect to the size of the deficit and the size of the debt and the amount of debt that needs to turn over. But the bond rating agencies, they're not going to like the fact that the government is not producing this type of financial document, updating Parliament, updating Canadians on the fiscal position. Again, we're getting it from other sources. We're getting it from the private sector. We're getting it from the Bank of Canada. We should get it from the Government of Canada.
Right. So is there as a final point, Kevin Page, we have seen fiscal updates that are just little snapshot updates, and we've seen fiscal updates that are basically, mini budgets, certainly in their own right. Is there a version and form of a fall economic statement that Minister Champagne can deliver that moves the agenda ahead and would satisfy the curiosity for information for the big bond raters and banks and others?
Yeah, I don't think we can wait to the fall with respect to the economic and fiscal outlook and what is the fiscal position as we're making these tax cuts. I think we need that in the next number of weeks. Again, that could be done by the finance minister. It could be done outside of Parliament. But I think come the fall, it'll be a full-scale budget. They may call it a statement, but it'll be a statement with the better part of 100 measures. And it'll be, for the most part, I would expect they're going to try to implement their agenda. Because even some of the private sector forecasters, they're saying, they're looking at the Kernney platform, and they're saying, well, that could provide a bit of a cushion. We're about to head, into a weak period. They're going to need to see, is the government going to implement that cushion, so to speak, to help stabilize the economy?
Right, some stimulus measures sort of thing you're talking about there. Is what you mean by the cushion? Yes?
Correct.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, Kevin Page, look, we always appreciate the detailed analysis. That's Kevin Page, President of the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy at the University of Ottawa. Thank you, sir.
Good to be with you, David.
Okay, we're going to start there with the power panel. Supriya Dwivedi was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And here with me in the studio, Tim Powers is a former strategist for Conservative parties. Jordan Leichnitz is a former NDP strategist. And Sherelle Evelyn is the managing editor of The Hill Times. Sherelle, let's start with you. Normally, we have to do a lot of planning and preparation, and Budget Day is a big day, and I guess we don't do that in 2025. What do you make of this move?
How nice to be able to take a break this year.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm still trying to wrap my brain around this a bit because it's a bit of an odd first step and first impression to make, to come out and say, you know what, we want to move on things. We want to be a government that gets things done. How about a budget? No, not that. Like it's a strange thing to do. And like I was looking back at some of the dates and the numbers, and the longest time we've gone between, a parliament starting and a budget being delivered is 501 days. And that was, after the 2019 election, COVID
happened, right.
There were some extenuating circumstances. Yeah. There's some, I know there's some talks like, oh, well, it's a new government, so to speak. Things take a while to get moving, but when the Conservatives came into power back in 2006. I think they took about a month to deliver their first budget. So it's not that it's not possible, but it seems strange to me to say that, okay, well, here are the logical steps. First, we're going to introduce legislation. We're going to have a throne speech, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't know why a budget can't be in that process. Earlier, Minister Champagne talked about, volatility and wanting to make sure that he's being accountable and all of those things because things are changing. Volatility is the name of the game right now, especially with Donald Trump. So are you going to delay things indefinitely? You can have a fall economic statement, and that could substantive, but it does seem strange to say that we're not going to present a budget.
So Priya, on that, to go back to the example Sherelle brought up, which was the pandemic delays when Bill Morneau, did not do a budget and made the point that everything's changing so much and we have to spend so much money so rapidly to support people, it wouldn't last the day. So the projections wouldn't be worth anything. But that was a pandemic. This is a president, and I understand that there are some challenges there. You've got a mandate they want to deliver on, and a budget's normally the vehicle to do it. So what do you make of this decision not to do it the typical way?
Yeah, it's weird. No budget's weird. I get that it's not unheard of, but in this instance, I would think that PM Kernney and his team in particular that are around him, as well as his finance minister, would want to lay out a clear plan to the public in terms of what they plan on investing in, where if there are going to be any efficiencies or savings or whatever, where that's going to be. And also, I think in terms of for the government, particularly on the civil service side, what promises, what they need to make good on in terms of promises. So it's almost like an accountability document as much as it is like a political laying out somebody's plan document. You point to the budget to be able to be like, well, we didn't get, XYZ done. So the next few months, we really need to focus in on that and make sure these things are delivered. And it's odd. And it's particularly odd to have laid out the cards so, quickly into the game out of the first cabinet meeting to say something like that, because if nothing else, now it just provides a lot of fodder to the opposition to kind of hammer the government with.
Yeah, I mean, Tim, it seems pretty clear the deficit will be larger. The financial assumptions all the parties were operating under in the election, which came from the PBO, I believe. I mean, that's not valid anymore. Not that anyone was being dishonest, just so many things have changed and have been disrupted. So, they're going to vote on a tax cut right away. That's $5-6 billion out of the bottom without knowing what the bottom line is. So, what do you think of this whole process?
Well, and what makes it equally strange is this is the first prime minister of modern memory who also worked in the finance department at a senior level. He knows his way around there. I don't think Canadians are looking for a massive, typical, detailed budget. I think they do want to see something. And I think Mark Kernney, of all the prime ministers we've had in recent memory, would have the ability to pull that together in a reasonable time. I mean, Supriya will know it does. If you're doing a proper budget, it does take 6 or 7 months. But I don't think the public wants that. The other thing, which you've raised repeatedly correctly, is, all right, if we're not having a budget, what are we going to do about these special warrants? They're going to need some kind of...
They'll pass supply, so the special warrants won't be necessary anymore.
Maybe they dress up the supply bills, and so people understand you have to have supply bills because that's what makes the money flow. Maybe that's where they're pivoting to. This seems like an early own goal that they don't need. I don't think it's going to be fatal. I don't think it's going to undo them, but... At this stage where you're on a bit of a high, when you have the capacity in your team to do something, it seems strange not to do it because you've marked everything else out there. So a little bit of a misfire here.
Yeah, I don't think it's fatal. They were just reelected with, a near majority, Jordan. But I guess I was assuming, just in terms of transparency in the moment we're in, to get an updated set of bottom line numbers on projections and forecasting and where we are just on the financial health of the country, and it's going to have to wait, 4 or 5 months maybe.
Sure. I think this is a real error and probably one of the first sort of serious communications errors we've seen from Prime Minister Kernney. Look, he was effectively hired by Canadians for a really specific job in terms of taking on Trump, dealing with the trade war, and dealing with the economic fallout of that. And I think it's best to understand a budget not just as a fiscal document, which of course it is, but also primarily as a political document and a chance to tell your story about what it is you're going to do to take on those challenges. So that's why it's really puzzling that he would actually miss an opportunity to use that tool to tell his story, because I don't think there's any sense that his government is not going to put a budget forward because they're not capable of doing it. Oh, no. They're choosing not to do it. And the reality is that right now, like Canadian manufacturers, for example, they just had the worst month that they've had since COVID-19. We have thousands of people being laid off. They can't wait necessarily until the fall to know what the plan is going to be on, for example, major things like EI and help for the unemployed. People are going to have questions that they deserve answers to pretty quickly.
Right, and I want to just pair this with a comment we got from, there were a lot of new faces going into the cabinet today, and one of those is Wayne Long. Well, not a full minister, he's part of the ministry. He's the Secretary of State for the Canada Revenue Agency and Financial Institutions, and famously the first Liberal caucus member to openly call for Justin Trudeau's resignation. But here's what he had to say about how he thinks this new government will run. This is Wayne Long.
I think Mark Kernney is exactly what the country is needed and needs. He's well-spoken, he's thoughtful, he's focused, and I think we're going to see our government run like a corporation, which I think is long overdue.
That is an interesting, Jordan, I'll stick with you. That is an interesting choice of words. I think you hear a lot of people say they want government to run more efficiency and maybe be a little bit more business-like, but like a corporation. I mean, what do you think is meant there, and how do you think that
Well, I think
plays?
Mr. Long is proving that leading insurrection doesn't perhaps qualify you to be a minister. Look, I think it's a terrible comment. Like, the government is not a corporation. That's not its job. And particularly, the CRA is not a corporation. Its job is to operate efficiently. Its job is to operate transparently and to get that work done. But I think that this whole notion that somehow Kernney's going to come in and run the government like it's a business is actually not what Canadians want to hear. They are interested in, yes, having better government services, but they want a government that's delivering things to them. And, you know, corporations have a profit motive. Our government doesn't. It is in the business of serving Canadians. And I think that that would be a much better core message for Mr. Long and his colleagues to have.
So, Priya, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I agree completely with Jordan. And I mean, look, comments like this, you often get a lot of snarky comments online about how because of the gender parity thing, the women are in there for DEI. Maybe Wayne Long's in there for DEI because that was a very asinine comment to make right out of the gate. And if you're talking about, like, let's actually think of what a corporation is and what it does. The singular role of a corporation is to maximize profits for its shareholders while limiting its liability. And that should quite literally never be the role of a federal government, since governments have to spend money on all sorts of things that will never turn a profit. And we don't want the government to constantly be in a situation where all they're thinking about is maximizing profits. I get where he was coming from in terms of, as you said, David, finding more efficiencies, whatever, but that's not how it came out. And perhaps some of these, you know, newbies would be best to just walk by the cameras and not say anything.
Well, okay. I mean, you know, Wayne Long is not some crazy right-winger here, right? Like, you know, he's an Atlantic-Canadian liberal from New Brunswick, you know, Sherrill, and like outspoken, but a business-minded liberal, like probably more to, well, where Mark Kernney thinks the Liberal Party should be. So is there a charitable interpretation of what he was trying to say there with more like a corporation? It struck me as more focused on the bottom line, maybe a bit more efficiently, but you can see the double-edged nature of that phrasing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm, you know, as a journalist, I'm never going to say that, you know, an elected official should just walk on by the cameras and not say anything. I'm very glad that they do speak. Whether or not we like what they have to say or they like what they have to say when they hear it back, that's a different story. But yeah, I do think that obviously there is that idea, and that is the kind of the cut and thrust of what we're expecting from a Kernney government is to be more you know, focused on the economy and things of that nature, and they're shaping that up as a contrast to the former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. I do wonder if, you know, things are kind of tilting too far into one direction or other, just as like a pendulum swing, simply because they said, okay, Justin Trudeau did it this way, therefore we have to do it this way because Justin Trudeau equals bad and we don't want to be associated and we want to put our own stamp on things. So as we drill down into thinking about the economy, about affordability, all the other things about, you know, are we thinking about social issues? Are we thinking about reconciliation? Are we thinking about, you know, diversity? All of those elements have become, you know, kind of swept off to the side because everybody is so laser focused right now on the economy and affordability, and anything that comes outside of that is seen as a bit of a distraction.
Yeah, well, there's laser focus in your messaging, and then there's laser focus in your actions, right? Like, and they do want to put the economy front and center, but
on the
they had a pretty balanced and broad representative cabinet.
Let me go to defense for Wayne.
No, just wait. I'll get you in a sec. Just finish your point.
Just on the messaging front, you know, we think about what the Prime Minister said yesterday when he was talking about speaking to the President, saying that he is the key messenger. Perhaps that is maybe the factors that he hasn't quite nailed that down of what the message is and who his messengers are on the domestic front right now.
Yeah, no, but that's a good point. But definitely on the Trump side, it's going to be his ball to carry. Tim, go ahead.
Look, I'm a bit of a Wayne fan in a strange sort of way. I like the fact that he's a bit of an agitator. Yeah, he made a mistake with that word. He shouldn't have used that. But if what he meant by that is, you know, in certain departments, in certain places, they're going to be more focused on cutting some fat and getting at efficiencies, then so be it.
Or growth over redistribution.
Yeah, well, look at the own department that he's responsible for. You guys will remember under Prime Minister Trudeau grew significantly. They put all kinds of auditors in there, all kinds of new auditors, because part of their policy approach was to find all these terrible tax cheats that were out there. So Wayne can focus all his energy on fixing his own department because there's a lot of wasted dollars there going after 85-year-old women and grandparents who are trying to get by. So good on you, Wayne, if you can do that. But he probably does, and this is probably just a new government thing too. They need, I like that they're putting them out there. That works well for you. But to Supriya's point, they probably need just a little bit more coaching and conditioning around what it is they're all trying to do and say. Maybe it speaks to some legitimacy to what Mark Kernney said yesterday about everybody's going to have a voice. I'm not sure how long Wayne will have a voice if he keeps using the word corporation. But you go, Wayne, you go.
All right. Well, look, here's someone who doesn't need any media coaching and is a familiar voice. It's the former Environment Minister, currently the Canadian Identity and Culture Minister, Stephen Gilbo. He was asked today about claims that the government, despite all of the promises in the election, is anti-pipeline. Take a listen to what he said.
We bought a pipeline, Trans Mountain, and that is only used right now about 40% capacity. So I think before we start talking about building an entire new pipeline, maybe we should maximize the use of existing infrastructure. And the Canadian Energy Regulator, as well as the International Energy Agency, are telling us that probably by 2028, 2029, demand for oil will peak globally, and it will also peak in Canada. So as far as I know, there are no investors right now. There are no companies that are saying that they want to build an east-west pipeline. And as you know, these things are built by companies, not governments.
Okay, so Tim, we know Daniel Smith is not going to like that. We know Scott Moe is probably not going to like that. What do you make of that answer from Stephen Gilbo, who has moved away from those files, but he's still the Quebec lieutenant in this government?
I guess there's a new historical moment coming on pipelines. Is there, or the National Film Board's about to tell the story? Well, what the hell's he doing weighing in on that? I mean, I get it is something that is dear to his heart, but it has nothing to do with his current remit. So back to what I said a moment ago and Supriya said a moment ago, guys, get yourself organized or you're going to be in trouble and you're going to have nights like this every night. Well, why did Cabinet Minister X say that? Why did Cabinet Minister Y say that? Mark Kernney yesterday in his interview on another network made the point that, yep, pipelines are on. He's coming out saying no. Again, not a great message, particularly if you're saying to the world, come do business here. Let's invest here. We're serious players. Well, on day 2 of your cabinet, one of your senior ministers is saying, I don't know.
Well, I mean, Jordan, he's not wrong in the point that there is not like there is a proponent with a big west-east pipeline.
But he is contradicting what his boss said yesterday.
Well,
directly contradicting his boss.
Yeah, well, yes, but on the narrow point I just made about a proponent, he's not contradicting anyone because there isn't one, right? But Mark Kernney has said, yeah, we want to be an energy superpower. We're open to pipelines, but a pipeline is not the only measure of success here. What do you make of the messaging we're seeing on this, though?
It's not his file. He shouldn't be talking about it. It's pretty straightforward. And look, you're right. There is no proponent that's come forward with a project, and that is something that has escaped many of the other conversations. He's not factually wrong on that, but he shouldn't be talking about it. And that's why I think it's really astonishing that in the end that they decided to keep him in cabinet. And I predict it's all going to end in tears because of his an inability to stay in his lane on this. Literally, you had the Prime Minister out yesterday saying the exact opposite of what of what he was saying today, and no alignment between them. It's unhelpful, I think, regardless of your view on the projects, to have the government speaking out of both sides of his mouth on this topic.
Okay, Scott Moe's just issued a list of demands he wants Mark Kernney to meet. That's what I was looking at there. We'll get to that when I actually have time to read it and digest it. I'm not going to spring it on you.
So he wants Stephen Gilbo?
Yeah, well, I don't think that's the case. So Priya, I mean, okay, it's not his file. But to get the West-East pipeline to where people want it to go, it has to go through Quebec. And, you know, he is the Quebec lieutenant, right? So that it kind of is his file, in a sense, as the one regional minister who exists in the government. But, you know, what do you make of what we're seeing there in terms of this and, you know, going into that first ministers' meeting that the Prime Minister is going to have at the beginning of June?
I mean, a couple of things. I mean, it's probably not the best if within 24 hours of you announcing your first cabinet and after your first cabinet meeting, you have not one, not two, but at least a few ministers, like 3 or 4 ministers, being completely off kilter from your own message. And in Gilbo's case, you know, to Jordan's point about it's not his file, like, so just, you know, say that. To your point about it being, you know, going through Quebec, that's fair, but he can also say something to that effect without also misspeaking about the capacity that TMX is operating on, because it isn't actually 40%, it's closer to something like 75 or 76%. And so not only did he say something to contradict his own boss, he's not even spitting real facts here. And I think that also, in terms of just needing to walk past the cameras or not needing to stop to comment, should be a lesson to all of these ministers going in and out of that room.
You know, but Sherelle, it is interesting. He did make a point there that they bought and built TMX, right? You know, government that bought and built a pipeline to use the powers of the federal government to push it through British Columbia is still very much perceived as anti-pipeline, I guess, in some ways because of that. And now it's coming at a moment when national unity is being challenged, largely over access to markets for fossil fuels.
Yeah, and every time, you know, that the output goes up and the price goes up and things are going well and Alberta politicians put up their celebratory posts, they always somehow manage to miss that fact.
Brian Jean was doing that last week, 4.4 million barrels a day, you know, new record level, right?
I wonder how that happened, and they never quite nailed down why and what's helping that achieve that fact. So I do think it'll be important for that, you know, national unity conversation and all those other conversations going forward as the Prime Minister sits down with the premiers to talk about, you know, and have those base level facts about what is actually going on, what is actually possible. But it definitely doesn't help when you have various people chiming in and kind of rocking the boat off of the message that they're trying to deliver.